Hey there, this is Seth Juarez. We're here at Build 2016. I'm excited to have a couple of friends on. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us what you do? We'll start with Sarah.
I'm Sarah. I work on the Node tooling in Visual Studio and in VS Code as well.
Fantastic. And you, sir?
And my name's Steve. I work on the Python tooling that we do a lot of at Microsoft, and I contribute to the core Python project. So Python, Python, Python.
I love it. And here's the thing. You were walking down past Building 20, and you're like, hey, we should have some Python and Node on.
We should come and talk on Channel 9 Live.
Absolutely. Because I think the message that we're getting here is that Visual Studio should just now be an editor for everyone.
Exactly. It's for a long time everyone's had this idea that it's all about C# and it's all about C++, depending on your background. But if you look at it now, if you get Visual Studio 2015 and you install it, there's 10 different languages that are supported there and so many different project types outside of the traditional ones that you'd expect to see.
Absolutely. So let's start with Node because Node is pretty cool. Why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of what kind of support we have in Visual Studio for Node? And I'm kind of cheating everybody because I've done stuff with Sarah and we went through a lot of it. It's been really cool to see that. There's probably some new stuff also. So why don't we start with sort of the basic. What can you do in Visual Studio with Node?
Yeah, so we actually have two tooling experiences available, right? So there's Visual Studio, and we released this, actually this is our 1-year anniversary for Node tools. So it's pretty exciting. And we have a bunch of, it has debugging, it has profiling, it has all the features that you expect from Visual Studio. We have IntelliSense, and it's pretty exciting to see that all come together. And then in VS Code, we have a more lighter weight experience that, IntelliSense and debugging.
So when you're saying IntelliSense, we all get that.
Yep.
When you're talking about debugging, though, is it like the regular debugging that I've come to know and love when I'm debugging C# apps, for example?
Absolutely, yeah. So you have the stack traces, the watch window, you have conditional breakpoints, trace points, pretty much everything there. And the same is also available for Python as well.
Oh, we'll get to him in a second.
Oh, okay.
I love me some Python too, but with Node.js, when you hit F5, is it running Node in the background?
Yeah.
What is it?
It spins up Node using the debug flag, and that way we're just interacting with Node using their debug protocol, and we're translating that all into the language that Visual Studio speaks so that we can light up the same user experience there.
And that's awesome because it's not like some fake, this is fake Node that we invented and then later it'll go on real Node. You're actually running real Node at the bottom of everything. It's exactly the same. What you've done is just put tooling over the top. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. If you go into and you open up a command line, you'll see the exact same code running. It runs the exact same way.
So what if I'm doing Node stuff with TypeScript? Does that kind of work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We also have JavaScript, TypeScript. We have tooling for both of those.
That's awesome. So if I'm going to build my standard Node Express application, I'm going to be typing npm. I'm going to be downloading stuff. I'm going to be using Grunt or Gulp or whatever, Browserify, all of that stuff, same thing.
Same exact thing. And it's funny because people don't realize that.
I know, I keep asking, are you sure that you're saying it's exactly the same thing?
Yep, so the same thing, the same tools that you have in the command line, they're also available in Visual Studio. And you can actually use the command line too. And people are always surprised when we do that, when we bring up the command line in a demo. But the goal isn't to restrict you in any way or provide any sort of abstractions. We want to make sure that you can take advantage of all of the tools that are out there in the community that you're used to, and that we can still work with the same workflow that you have.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so in the end, it's Visual Studio literally just doing everything you would have done at the command line. It's just doing that for you.
Yep.
That's awesome. All right, so now we're going to move on to Python. And can I tell you something? All of the research I did in school, all Python.
Yeah,
all Python, matplotlib, those kinds of things. Tell us about the support for Python, maybe not as well understood or known.
Yeah, so the first thing, I've had the booth here at Build for a couple of days, and probably the first question a lot of people come up and ask is this all about IronPython? And it's like, I want to stop and clarify, no, it's not. About 6 years ago when we started, it was briefly all about IronPython, and we very quickly saw that most people are using CPython, and there's some variation of that. So we pivoted very early on, and it's like the whole focus is on CPython. So it's an editor, right?
Right.
You're typing code, you're debugging, you're profiling, and so all of that works with CPython, as well as IronPython, Jython, PyPy. There's all these different interpreters out there. But we are CPython first. Everything that we run on Azure is running on CPython for if you deploy any code up there. IronPython still exists. It's still a live project. It's community driven, but it's not our core focus in any way. So
The real deal.
this is the real deal. This is the Python that everyone's using in the editor that everyone wants to use.
I love it. So a number of years ago, there was this thing that happened with Python where there was like the 2 and then the 3, right? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I know what
so,
you're saying,
So
yes.
right now, if you're on the 2, it's like 2.7. If you're on the 3, it's like 3.3. If I remember right, maybe 3.4. Do we support that split as well?
Absolutely. So we're actually up to 3.5
Oh,
recently.
wow.
Yeah.
I'm behind everybody.
We've got a nice new pretty one. I actually I contributed a lot of the work for the brand new Windows installer on that. So there's been a lot of feedback. It's like, oh, it's a really pretty installer now. That was a lot of work that we contributed through me into the core Python development team. So that was really fun to be able to work with that external project like that. But yeah, we have Python 3.5. We let you choose and use any version of Python in your Python project. So we support 2.5, which is really old now,
Yes.
through 2.6, 2.7, 3.0, which I don't think anybody's using
Right,
at all,
yeah.
all the way up to 3.5. And we have all of the language features supported there, so up to and including async and await, which is new in Python 3.5. We'll highlight those properly and give you the right IntelliSense when you use those for all the different features through all of the languages. So it's had quite an evolution. And yeah, the 2 and 3 split is still hurting us a little
Yeah.
bit, still hurting the Python community. It's a shame. But we are definitely seeing momentum towards people focusing on Python 3 and moving forward with the supported versions. So
That's awesome. So let me ask a couple of questions there because I've used Python quite a bit. So there's some libraries in Python that will spin up windows that will show you like graphs, for example. Is that something that's supported? I mean, is it just like the Node story where we're pinging the bottom and it's Python running?
yeah, so everything that we run through Visual Studio is just using the usual tools. I mean, the tools that are out there for Python are great. They're widely used, widely adopted, very popular. And if we wrote something new, nobody would want to use it because they're like, I've got this existing better tool.
Right.
So yeah, we work on top of that. Matplotlib has a central place in our interactive experience for displaying graphs. Pip is the standard package management tool.
Yeah.
And so we layer on top of that with, we'll show you everything that you've got installed. We'll let you search the online repositories from within Visual Studio, and it's all just going through the standard tooling. So if you do need to jump out to the command line, you can do that, and it doesn't interfere or mess with anything. We're just typing the commands for you.
The other question I have for you is, in Node, it's pretty clear what JavaScript file you're starting, right? There's like I don't know what it is, server.js or,
Well,
I mean, it could be, right? Like, because if it's a particular, like if it's an Express app, there's a very specific way to start that.
yeah, there's some complications when you get into, there are a lot of file system watchers, things like NodeMon and stuff like
Right.
that. But overall, there's a single point of entry. Yeah.
In Python, there really isn't.
Well, again, it's a very flexible language, and people have different needs, different requirements. So there's a lot of code that does start from just a plain old Python file, and when you're inside Visual Studio, you can right-click that and say, make this the one that's going to start up when I hit F5.
That was the question. Like, how do you say what to start up with?
And that's what we started with, is being able to change that. And the feedback we got very early on said, I keep switching all the time. It's like, I'm in this file and I just want to run this one right now. So you can right-click anywhere in the file and say, start this file right now, with the debugger, without the debugger, wherever you happen to be. You don't need to switch it and hit F5. We brought the commands front and center in every single Python file.
And that's awesome, right? Because with Express, there's some clarity. You're right that there's other things going on. But in Python, I could have 15 Python files that all do something. Because when I did research, right, when you do research code, it's ugly, people. Don't ever show your research code to anybody. I would have maybe 10 or 15 files, and I would be experimenting on a number of different things. You're saying I can go into any file, right-click, say run this file.
Yeah, and I mean, 15 files sounds like a very small research project. 'Cause
Yeah,
I remember some of mine I had many more Python files in mine.
Yeah,
than
I try to
that.
be not as ugly as possible, but it turned out that it was ugly.
Yeah, at some point you just need to get something done. It doesn't matter how it looks.
So then the other question I have is, she talked about running Node.js in debug mode. I wasn't aware that there was such a thing for Python. Can you talk about how you can actually do breakpoints in Python?
Sure, so Python doesn't have a debug mode as such, but there is a function you can call that sets up a trace function. So essentially, you can write a Python function and then get that to be triggered on every single time we get to the next line of code. And there's a few other events that it gets triggered on, but essentially, every time Python gets to the next line of code, it'll call that function and say, I'm at this line of code in this file, and then we've plugged that into our debugger. So our debugger is pure Python code. It works on any platform. You can run our debugger on Windows, Linux, or Mac and debug it from Visual Studio remotely because it's pure Python code for the debugger. We get called into that. If you've set a breakpoint on that line, we just hold it there. We just go into a holding loop where we can inspect variables, send them back through the Visual Studio IDE.
Right.
And when you say continue, then we return and it just keeps going naturally.
So that's how you, see, how did you solve the debugging issue in Python? That's really clever. I did not know that that was built in. So
Yeah.
how do you hook into that trace function? Is it something a developer has to do or Visual Studio?
So we do that through Visual Studio just by running a little bit of Python code before we start your actual project, and it's just a Python function call. Now, possibly the more interesting one, so one thing that we support in Python that is unique to Visual Studio is if you have a native C module that you've compiled and you're using from Python, we actually have mixed mode debugging. And this is one of our unique features of Visual Studio. We'll let you step through Python code. When it calls into C, you jump into the C module. You can hover over variables in either one.
In the C module?
In the C module, it'll show you the Python objects as if they were in Python code. You can see the C objects from the Python code as if they were in C. And the way we did that is slightly different. That's using the standard native debugger. And we do some interpretation. So we see, oh, these are the Python internal stack frames here. Let's translate those and make them look like Python frames. So when you're looking in the stack window, you see C, C, Python, 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 C, C, Python. You can jump to any of those, inspect variables in any of those. So that's a different approach to the normal cross-platform one. It only works on Windows, but it works great. We know of a number of really big, cool companies that love using Python tools for Visual Studio because they can do that.
And for those who don't know, can you explain what do you mean by their C code in some Python stuff? I mean, I understand why, but can you tell us why?
Sure, so CPython is an interpreted language. You start running the code and it compiles into a bytecode and then it runs through an interpreter loop, which means if you're doing a lot of operations, it can be slow at some things. It's the inherent nature of you either spend a lot of time compiling and then it's quick to run, or you don't spend much time compiling and it's slow to run.
Yeah.
And so the way people fix that is by taking the really important parts of their code and writing them in C, or converting them to C and compiling them so it's already done. And then they run really fast. But then you lose a lot of the nice Python features. You don't get the Python level debugging. You can't inspect variables as easily. You need a C debugger.
Right.
And luckily, Visual Studio has probably the best C debugger out there. And so we take that and we give you that for when you're in C inside Python code, and also make it so the Python code is as nice to use as it would be in a regular Python debugger.
That's amazing. I'm excited for both Node.js and Python. So we have about 90 seconds left. Can you tell me where we can go just sort of to get started? I know you mentioned them, but let's call them out again.
So there is aka.ms/ntvs to get the node tooling for Visual Studio. There's aka.ms/ptvs to get the Python tools. And then there's also code.visualstudio.com to get VS Code.
And I know we've kind of got like a minute left. Do all these things also work in VS Code for Python and for Node.js? I know for Node.js, the story is a little bit better, right?
So Visual Studio Code is, it's a newer thing. We've got more engineering work to get into to bring those up to parity, if we can even get them there to parity. Certainly, Node.js is further along in Visual Studio Code. It's developed in Node.js. So when the developers are working on it and say, this isn't very good, I'll just go and fix it.
Yeah.
If we had Python developers using it, then I'm sure Python would be up to there as well. But unfortunately, it's not. The community is really picking that up, though. There's a great Python extension already out there that someone in the community has written for VS Code. So we're really excited to see the community coming in and saying, yeah, we want Python support. We're going to make it happen, whether Microsoft does it or not. So.
Well, this is awesome. I love seeing how Visual Studio is actually using all of the languages, right? And with the new Visual Studio, installing only the things that target what you need, I think it's really great. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. Again, we're here in San Francisco for Build 2016. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.